Introduced in Android 8.0, Project Treble is arguably the most significant architectural change in Android's history. It addressed Android's most notorious problem, the fragmentation and delays in OS updates. Before Android 8.0, the Android OS framework and device-specific hardware drivers were closely intertwined. Hardware abstraction layers, or HALs, were loaded directly into the framework's memory space. Because they lived in the same process, the framework and HALs had to be compiled together. Any changes to the framework's internal structure often required the HALs to be modified and recompiled. When Google released a new Android version, they published the AOSP source. Silicon vendors then had to rewrite their hardware drivers to support the new framework. Device OEMs then integrated these updated pieces into their specific system images. This linear dependency meant an OEM couldn't update without active support from the silicon vendor. Project Treble decoupled the OS framework from the hardware implementation by enforcing a strict boundary. Treble mandated the physical separation of code onto different partitions, a system partition and a vendor partition. The system partition contains the generic Android OS framework from AOSP. The vendor partition contains the device-specific hardware drivers, or HALs. To communicate, Treble introduced a formalized vendor interface using something called HIDL. Instead of being loaded together, the HAL now runs in its own separate process. The framework communicates with the HAL over this standardized interface using inter-process communication. Because the vendor partition is now independent, it needs its own set of stable libraries called the VNDK. Google guarantees the stability of these libraries, ensuring an older vendor partition can work with a newer system partition. To enforce all this, Treble requires that all compliant devices must be able to boot a generic system image. A GSI is a pure, unmodified AOSP system image. It's the ultimate test of the vendor interface. If a device can boot this GSI using its existing vendor partition, it proves the separation is working. Project Treble significantly reduced the engineering effort required to update an Android device. OEMs can now update the system partition with a newer Android version while keeping the vendor partition unchanged. This shift laid the groundwork for faster updates, extended support, and future modularization like Project Mainline.
Enjoyed the video? Hit like and subscribe for your regular dose of AOSP customization. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.